Hello again, Walter. Hillsborough near Lisburn is a place of elegance, a scene of architectural beauty. It was once called Cromlin, or the Crooked Glen, and today I'd like to recount for a while the life of its most famous son, Sir Hamilton Harty, musical composer and conductor of orchestras. When I was young, I formed a great love for the music of Handel, and back in those days I'd often listen to Harty's transcriptions of the water music and the music for the royal fireworks on our crackly old dry battery radio. Herbert Hamilton Harty was born in Hillsborough on the 4th of December 1879, one of 10 children of the church organist of St Malachy's Church of Ireland parish there, William Harty, and his wife Annie Elizabeth, whose maiden name was Richards. William Harty had come to Hillsborough in 1878 at the age of 26. It is believed he originally hailed from Limerick. His wife was from Dundalk. He led a busy musical life, playing the Schnetzler organ, which had been installed in the parish church long before his time by Wills Hill, the first Marquess of Downshire, who lived from 1718 until 1793, and was an important man in English politics. William also took music pupils. He lived for music, and his house resounded, it is said, from morning until night with its sounds. Just for interest, Walter, during William's early years there, in fact from 1874 until 1892, the affairs of the Downshire family, including the appointment of church organist, were in the hands of Lord Arthur Hill, whose wife, under her maiden name Annie Harrison, was the composer of many songs, including one which became famous called In the Gloaming. Gloria Honeyford, the popular TV and radio personality, has recorded it. Hamilton Harty was born not in the organist's house, but in a house near the bottom of the hill in Main Street. The family called him Bertie. He was a rather shy young boy who was sometimes bullied by his peers, I think because they saw him as different from themselves. He was perhaps given to dreaminess and often talked when young of his mighty orchestra, waving a stick as if conducting. Bertie was something of a child prodigy on the organ. Everyone remembered him being able to play it from no age. One time he missed school and was found in the organ gallery playing. This reminds me, Walter, of the young George Frederick Handel, who would often be lost and found at the console of an organ when a very young boy. It is interesting that Harty in his later life had such an affinity for Handel's music. There is a lovely story told of the young Harty children burying their family's ginger cat in the garden. They put the body in a cardboard box with 4 pall-bearers. Harold, one of the brothers, was in charge. He had a tablecloth draped around him and read a half-page from the boy's own paper. The rest of the children were mourners who wore clothing borrowed from their mother's cupboard. Bertie was in front of all of them, playing a tune on his tin whistle. It is said the father couldn't contain himself with laughter when he witnessed the spectacle. As I've said, Walter, the Harty household was one of incessant music. When Hamilton was 10 years old, he played trios with his father and mother, and the threesome travelled the countryside, appearing in so-called grand concerts, with him on the piano and the others on violins. He also had at least one piano pupil from this time, the wife of the local tailor. Harty himself recollected about this in later life, in 1934 in fact, when he spoke of the arrangement whereby the tailor paid him by providing a suit of clothes for every term's tuition. He said, and I quote, "If my teaching was anything like the suit he made for one term's teaching, it must have been frightful." Relationships within the Harty home seem to have been very good. The children contented themselves with their music or pony rides. The father kept a working pony for his trap. They had bicycle races around their large garden. In the bicycle races, it was always made clear by Bertie that their father had to win. Canon John Barry, the former rector of St Malachy's Parish Church, has contributed much to David Greer's fine biography of Hamilton Harty, written in 1978 and published by the Blackstaff Press. Barry paints an idyllic picture of the young Hamilton and his surroundings in the Hillsborough of the late Victorian era. He speaks of the quiet, romantic and historic natural beauty of the place, the Irishness of the Harty household and of the Downshires, who encouraged this sense of Irishness in themselves and the place. William Harty was a great collector of Irish poetry and folklore. Apparently Hamilton never lost this love of his home place. All through his life he came back again and again. Barry maintains that Hillsborough had a great effect on Hamilton Harty's future musical development. Hamilton Harty was a church organist at the age of 14. The parish of Macharagall, 3 miles from Hillsborough, appointed him in February 1894 on a salary of £12 per year. From an early age he was dabbling in composition. Indeed, it is amazing that he was largely self-taught, or certainly taught only by his father. When one thinks of all the eminent composers and conductors down the years whose CVs list them as having attended this conservatory or that academy of music, this fact is truly impressive and points how Harty must have had such innate musical ability. In November 1895 he moved to Belfast as organist to St Barnabas's in the town. I think this church was in Dunkern Gardens. However, he did not stay long here and moved to Bray, County Dublin, to Christ Church. During his time of residence in the Dublin area, he got to know Michel Espirito, who was a prominent influence in Dublin musical circles at the time and professor of the piano at the Royal Irish Academy. Espirito, whose dates are 1855 to 1929, was from Naples, and although Harty was never his pupil, the two of them developed a close friendship for the rest of Espirito's life. Another friend was John McCormack, the famous Irish tenor, and again this friendship endured too. Harty entered some of his compositions for the Dublin Festival, where his string quartet in F, Opus 1, received one of the highest commendations at the 1900 event. Harty by now was making quite a name for himself as an accompanist. When Queen Victoria made a visit to the Irish capital in 1900, Hamilton accompanied Madame Ella Russell, one of the outstanding singers of the day. The event took place at the Viceregal Lodge. Hamilton started to tour Great Britain, and in this way he met the cellist W.H. Squire, again forming a lifelong friendship with him. In 1901 he moved to London and took the organ at All Saints, Norfolk Square, but the arrangement lasted only a week. Apparently the vicar there did not approve of his organ playing. I have not been able to ascertain why. However, with the help of Squire, he existed by playing at soirees for high society people and for other engagements for professional music bodies, such as accompanist at the boozy ballad concerts, which featured not only the finest singers of the period, but instrumentalists of the highest calibre, such as Solomon and Chrysler. In 1904, his string quartet in A was given its first London performance. In this year, too, he composed his Irish Symphony, full of Irish folk themes. He later made 2 revisions to this symphony. Through his work he met Agnes Nichols, one of the leading sopranos of the day. She was an opera singer who had made her debut in 1895 at the age of 18 in Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. They met in late 1902 and got married 2 years later. Philip Hammond in David Greer's biography states that they were well matched musically, but their marriage apparently was unsuccessful. We are not told why. Irrespective of this, their union had profound consequences for Hamilton, and that through her connections in the musical world, he was able to gain recognition as a conductor. One very valuable connection was through her knowing Hans Richter, the most eminent conductor of the day in England, and it was he who arranged for Harty to have his first big conducting engagement. In these early years of the century, several of his compositions were given first performances, like his comedy overture at the 1907 Proms, the violin concerto in 1909, and his setting of Keats' Ode to a Nightingale for soprano and orchestra, first sung by his wife in Cardiff in 1907. In the period 1900 to 1910, he also published songs including Sea Wreck, The Blue Hills of Antrim, The Lane of the Thrushes and My Lagan Love. Some of these would have been composed much earlier. As I've said, Walter, the glory in many ways of Harty's artistic achievement was that he was almost completely self-taught. In this, the nearest parallel would be Sir Edward Elgar. Harty's method was in studying the great masters who had gone before him and learning from them. His father had a great collection of orchestral and other works in his library in Hillsborough, and Harty, when young, became immersed in them. Philip Hammond does suggest, however, that Harty's lack of an academic musical training and its necessary interaction with other young musicians with their new sounds, ideas and innovations meant that by the time he came to London his ideas were fixed. Hammond feels that to an extent his creativity missed out on this. Around about 1911, his toned poem With the Wild Geese received its London premiere. This was a musical reflection on those Irishmen who went to Europe in the wake of the flight of the Earls in the early 18th century and who soldiered in continental armies for many years. There was one work, however, which established Harty, and that was the setting for baritone, chorus and orchestra of a poem by Walt Whitman. The work was called The Mystic Trumpeter and first performed in October 1913 in Leeds. Also in that year he conducted the operas Tristram and Isolde and Carmen at Covent Garden. But opera was not greatly to his liking, as he later made clear in an interview in the publication The Musical Times. In June 1916 he joined the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve and was given hydrophone duties in the North Sea. He was a part-time naval officer, having been made a lieutenant in 1917, and combined his war service with his musical duties. However, combining both his naval work and musical engagements and the death of his father in February 1918 took a toll on his health. It seems though he enjoyed his war service. Sufficiently recovered, he resumed conducting in late 1918, and in April 1920, with the support of Sir Thomas Beecham, was appointed as Conductor-in-Chief of the Halley Orchestra in Manchester. Thus began an association with live performances and gramophone recordings, which was to last until 1933. Speaking at the time of his appointment, we get an insight into his musical likes and dislikes. Bach and Mozart are his musical gods. Handel he rates very highly, whilst his love of the music of Hector Berlioz did much to promote that composer's work in the 20th century. Brahms he could take or leave, while César Franck generally left him cold. It's refreshing, Walter, to hear him speak so honestly on these matters. Which brings me to say a few things about Harty the man. Leonard Hirsch, who was a member of the strings of the Halley in the time of Harty, has left us some of his memories of the master. Hirsch recounts how when one was playing, Harty always appeared to have his eyes on each individual player. He always seemed to have a complete mastery of whatever score the orchestra was playing, never seemed to raise his voice much, and got complete control over his orchestral forces. He had a gentle yet penetrating wit. On one occasion he remarked to a player in the brass section that that person's playing was too loud. The musician replied that the score was marked forte, meaning loud. "Well, make it 20, came Sir Hamilton's rapier-like reply. At the time of his appointment to the Halley, he insisted on an all-male band of players, save for the harpist. This caused something of a stir at the time, but he got his way. Hirsch also recounts a funny episode when during rehearsals one day, actually Berlioz's Romeo and Juliet, he suddenly stopped and said, "Boys, remember you are making love to the girl, not pulling her around by the hairs of her head." As an accompanist, it seems he had an uncanny sense of anticipating the intentions of the soloist. This applied whether he was working with the orchestra or on the piano, and praise in this from many distinguished musicians is a fact. He gently guided his players, and also gave great encouragement, it seems, yet did not suffer fools gladly, nor was he satisfied with slipshod performances. Very often, Walter, with many people, there is a sharp contrast between their public and private personas. With Harty, this was not the case. Public and private faces of him matched. Hamilton's recreations included the playing of poker, at which he was extremely good. Leonard Hirsch's recollections state that when the famous pianist Moiseiowitz played at the Halle concerts, he and Hamilton used to have a game of poker afterwards. It is said that Hamilton invariably won. Harty was on first-name terms with many members of the orchestra and treated his players very humanely. He was fond of fishing, and for many years went to Fermanagh and fished Loch Melvin. He fished in the west of Ireland too, on the Corrib. Other places that he had holidays in included his beloved Donaghadee, which was the favourite holiday spot of his childhood. And later in life, Rostrevor and Port Ballantrae were spots he went back to as well. Hillsborough he returned to again and again, and when there would always include a visit to St. Malachy's Church. In the church he always spent some time looking up at the organ gallery, no doubt invoking memories of his father. His home in Eccles near Manchester he named Ballinderry, more memories of home. In the mid-1920s he gave an organ recital in Hillsborough, which is still spoken of by people of a certain age in the locality. Harty was knighted in 1925. He was a prime mover in promoting municipal aid for the Halle, and indeed he was successful in obtaining it in 1924. These concerts survived in Manchester until the Second World War put an end to them in 1940. It was as the result of one of these concerts in 1929 that Harty made his famous Columbia recording of Purcell's Nymphs and Shepherds. In it was featured the Halle and a Manchester Children's Choir. In 1975, long after his death, there was a reunion of many of the children who took part in the original recording. Harty took the orchestra several times to London, where it was received most enthusiastically. However, in the 20s he was criticised for having too conservative a taste in relation to modern music. Harty was always more drawn, it is fair to say, to the music of an earlier age than his own, though he did from time to time introduce music which could be termed modern. He received honorary doctorates in music in the middle 20s from both Trinity College in Dublin and Manchester University, and a fellowship from the Royal College of Music. On occasions he was not afraid to be controversial. For instance, in 1930 he criticised heavily the BBC for starting its own symphony orchestra, and not, as he saw it, simply continuing exclusively its promotion of independent orchestras. In 1931 he made his first American tour to Chicago, where he was warmly received as a visiting conductor. In the later 1930s he went to Australia, where his conducting received a similar accolade. From 1925 he had recorded too, with Columbia and Decca, the works of the great masters and much else, though interestingly he never made a recording of a work he loved, the Berlioz Symphonie Fantastique. Harty was to leave the Hallé in 1933. He had a dispute with them over, as he saw it, his right to conduct other orchestras on occasion.